Hello everyone, I am Ariana from The Therapist Next Door. So today I'm going to be talking about something that affects all of us at some point in our lifetime, which is grief. So because it is such a universal human experience, I want to have a video on it, including different kinds of grief and loss, and also the 5 stages of grief, which I think do a pretty good job of explaining some of the common and very normal responses we have after we experience a loss. The first thing I'd like to talk about are the different kinds of grief. So typically when you think about grief, you think about somebody losing a loved one, but there's also so many other different kinds of grief and loss that can take place. For example, besides the loss of a loved one, it may also be the loss of a pet, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a home or a job, and even the loss of an imagined or desired future. For example, maybe you wanted to have kids and that was something that you weren't able to do, and that could be very much a loss in terms of having a typical grief response to that. I think it's important for us to be mindful that there are different kinds of grief and loss, and so that when we are supporting either loved ones, friends, family, clients, we understand and we try to normalize those different kinds of losses that there are. And there might even be more that I haven't mentioned or that I can't think of. I want us all to understand that grief goes beyond the loss of a human life, and so it's just important to make sure that we open that up in case the people in our lives are experiencing other kinds of loss so that we can support them with that. Now I'm going to jump into the 5 stages of grief and loss. And before I jump into what these stages are, I just want to give a few disclaimers in that these stages don't go in any particular order, and you can be in multiple stages at once. And it's not like when you get through all the stages, that means that you're not grieving anymore. Most people that experience grief tend to say that it never fully goes away. Some of them describe it as just kind of getting a little bit more bearable or manageable with time. But it's just important to understand that these stages are typically what people tend to go through. And so you may yourself be identifying with some of these stages. And it might also, again, be good for you to be aware of what these are so that when you're supporting your loved ones or maybe even going through this yourself, you can feel normalized and understand that this is a normal part of the process. The first stage is called denial. Now, this can manifest in many different ways. Sometimes the denial is just, when you get that initial phone call and it's maybe more of a shocking or tragic loss, we may want to deny that that's actually happening. And then there's also subconscious forms of denial. So this might be days or even weeks after the loss, and you may go to pick up your phone and call that person or text that person that you've lost, only to realize that they're no longer alive. This is very common and very normal. Your brain and your body is still trying to adjust to the loss of this person or this thing in your life. So understand that it's very common to want to deny that loss, whether that is conscious or subconscious. The second stage is anger. So a lot of times people don't typically associate anger with grief. When you hear about grief either in film or TV or in Hallmark cards, you typically tend to think of sadness. You tend to think of people crying and expressing their grief in that way. However, anger is a very normal part of this. The anger could be towards God. It could be towards that person for leaving. It could be towards, for example, they were battling a disease and maybe towards a disease or the healthcare professionals that were taking care of them. You may even find that you have anger towards yourself for things that maybe you regret or you didn't get a chance to do with this person or this pet or whichever loss we are referring to. Understand that if you're finding yourself more irritable or you've experienced some feelings of anger, that this is very normal, very common. And there's good ways that you can channel this. For example, you could use journaling. Some people really find exercise as a good form of getting anger out, even screaming into a pillow, as silly as that sounds. All of these things can be helpful with channeling that anger, but just finding a way to get it out of your body or out of your mind and outside, whether it's through writing or any other activity. The next stage is called bargaining. Similar to denial, bargaining is just when you haven't really fully accepted the way in which this loss happened. So you might be asking questions like, well, if I would have just done this, or if this person would have just taken a different freeway, or if the doctors had noticed this sooner, you start maybe blaming yourself, or you're just, again, you're not ready to accept that this has happened, and you're asking yourself different questions. And sometimes people even try to make a deal with God or their higher power to say, hey, if I never do this again, will you just bring this person back? So those are all some really good examples of how bargaining can manifest when you're experiencing responses that fall more into that stage. The next stage is depression. That's pretty self-explanatory. This is a stage where you're just experiencing a lot of loss, a lot of feelings of emptiness, a lot of sadness. Sometimes it may look like clinical depression, loss of interest. You're having a hard time finding pleasurable activities, things that you used to like, you're not liking them anymore. Maybe you're even having a hard time getting out of bed. Again, understand that this is normal. A lot of times in our society, we like to diagnose, things that are really normal reactions. So it's normal to feel depressed after a significant loss. You want to just make sure that you're not going through this alone. With depression, it's really important to make sure that you're not isolated. So make sure that you are accessing support groups, that you are talking to friends and family, that you're not spending too much time by yourself. I know it's tempting to want to just kind of crawl in a hole by yourself, but it's really, really not helpful when you're going through this stage. It's okay to take some alone time, but just don't take too much alone time. That would be my recommendation. And again, understand that there's nothing wrong with you. This is a normal reaction to a traumatic loss. And with time, this will change. Now, if you're noticing that it's been several weeks, maybe it's been months, and you feel like you're stuck in this state of depression, that's a good indicator that you may want to get some help in addition to, a support group or just talking with family and friends. That would be a really good time for you to get your own individual therapist. Potentially, you may want to be evaluated for medication support. I always recommend to first look at holistic options, acupuncture, chiropractor, nutrition, potential supplements. If you're interested in potentially consulting with an Eastern practitioner, I think all of that stuff is really important. But just again, it's not really what you choose to do, but just make sure that if you're feeling stuck in this stage after several weeks, maybe even going into months, there's additional levels of care that you should and can access at that point. Okay, the last stage is acceptance. Once again, I just want to reiterate, this doesn't mean that you're just so happy that everything is, flowers and sunshine in your world. It's really not. Most people, again, describe grief as a lifelong thing. It's just something that maybe becomes a little bit less intense over time. Now, with acceptance, what that means is that you've started to be able to see your future. Maybe you're able to see yourself graduating or getting married or whatever other milestones are going to be coming up in your life. And you're starting to see those things happening and understand that that person or that thing isn't going to be a part of it. Maybe you don't feel like you're in shambles when you think about that. You're starting to accept the new version of your life without this person or this thing. So those are the stages of grief and loss that I'm aware of, that I'm familiar with. If you know of any other good tools or good information for grief, please leave it in the comments so that anybody watching this video can have access to that. But again, just really important to know that all of these things are very normal. There is help out there apart from grief therapists and grief support groups. There's hotlines, there's websites, there's books. There's so many things that you can do. And more importantly than anything, just give yourself grace and don't go through it alone, because it's something that is one of the most difficult things that we're going to experience in our lifetime. And it's something that we're all going to experience at some point. So hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you guys soon. Authentically yours, Ariana.